This final video is just going to talk about comparing the forecasting techniques and a little bit about what else you could find, what other information you could find from the regression analysis. It may be the better forecasting technique, it may not. With this particular sample data set I'm looking at, that I've been doing the examples on, again, it's not the same as your homework file, but using the best forecast with alpha and beta optimized, we got a mean absolute percent error of 124%. I then went into the final regression analysis using the numbers, predicted cells and residuals, which Excel printed out for me. I also calculated absolute percent error and mean absolute percent error. Calculate all of those. So this is just absolute percent error is the absolute value of the percentage of the error. So in this case, 14 units divided by 40 units that are actually sold, so 36% error in absolute terms. Now, some of these were negative. Error was -7, so that's 115% error because our actual cells were 6. Mean absolute percent error is just the average, right, running average of all the absolute percent errors up to that point in time. Okay, so then I could use the predictions and residuals and mean absolute percent error columns to make some charts. So the first chart I want to see is something comparing actual sales, in this case is the blue line, to the regression forecast, the red line, and the time series forecast. We can see that the green time series forecast is a much smoother line, but we can also see that the regression forecast, the red, follows much more closely to actual sales. We still have some pretty significant forecast errors at points. Anywhere you see that the red and blue lines are not touching, you have a forecast error. But based on this chart, you'd say a regression forecast looks like it's doing a better job at predicting sales. The next thing we could do is look at the mean absolute percent error of both forecasting techniques. Here, blue is regression. You can see is much lower than the red from the time series. So based on this chart, we would also say that regression analysis is the better forecasting technique. And then finally, I didn't ask for this in homework, but another way to look at this, which might be a good idea, is to look at the actual forecast error, or you could look at the absolute percent errors. Either one, just to see, did one of the techniques have consistently higher forecast errors, or a few points where they had a very, very high forecast error. So in this case, again, the regression forecasting technique looks like it's a better fit. The blue line is our mean absolute percent error, or is our forecast errors pretty high consistently, but the red is consistently higher. There are a few specific points where the time series was a better forecast, but on average, this also would show the regression is a better forecast. However, it's possible that, say in your homework file, that based on MAPE, regression had a lower, but there might be some really high forecast errors in regression and not have that in the time series, which may make you reconsider which is the best forecasting technique. But that's what I'm looking for. In the report, I want to see at least a couple, whatever charts you use to make your decision, and an explanation of what the chart is and why that caused you to make the decision you did in terms of which is the better forecasting technique. You might also say that in this case, MAPE is like 54%. With our best forecasting technique, we might say, we really need to look at a better way to make a forecast. Maybe we could use that gifts that go variable, somehow transform the variable where we could include it in our regression and get a better forecast or something. So that might be something to look at. And you could just mention in the report that that would be a way to improve the forecasting the forecasts, to include additional variables, whether the one we left out or other variables that might be of interest, things like interest rate, like fuel price we left out of our analysis. So those are things that might be able to help you improve the forecast. And then the final thing I wanted to mention is on the homework is some additional questions about regression. What else can we learn from regression? Specifically, what is the impact of increasing newspaper advertising or number of personnel, and should we do that? What would you recommend to managers about that? Unfortunately, the data set, we do not have any information on the profit. What's the profit they make from each vehicle, even gross profit or net profit. So all we could say is things like, if you spend an extra $1,000 in newspaper advertising, because remember this variable was given in thousands of dollars, we could sell on average 1 3/4 extra vehicles per month. So then management should look at what would be the potential profit, additional profit compared to the additional expense. Right? Would the additional profit exceed $1,000? If not, it still wouldn't make sense to include that. Personnel, it says hire an additional person or have on average one extra person on the sales floor. You'd sell 3.5 more vehicles per month. Again, we don't have data on cost-benefit analysis to do a cost-benefit analysis. But we could say what would happen, what we would expect to happen on average if we were to change these variables. Price, it's a very small number. See, if we raise price by $1, it'd have a minimal impact. But we could just multiply that by, say, 500 or 1,000 and see what's the impact if we raise price by $1,000, for example. With decimal place over, we would sell 4.8 fewer vehicles. Again, we can't say what is that additional profit compared to the missed profit from not selling as many vehicles. And then promo, again, we sell extra 8 vehicles if we have a promo. What's the cost of having a promotion, and what's the profit per vehicle? Is it worth it? We don't know. So just mention that, something to look at. As far as the variables we left out of the analysis, if we go back to the initial regression, we found that magazine advertising seemed to have no impact on sales. Now, could we recommend that they cut magazine advertising entirely or switch to a completely new magazine? We'd want to look at our data to find that out. And you look over here, magazine, we can see that there were times in the past where they spent $0 on magazine advertising. Their sales were still high. So we could say, yes, cut your magazine advertising completely, or switch to a completely different magazine, try to do some market research, find out which magazines are recreational vehicle buyers reading, and then after some time look at the impact again on sales.